Strong, secure, everlasting, innovative, resilient, stylish. Throughout the past 110 years, the face of building materials has continued to evolve. We're here for a lifetime of living. This is Brickworks. More than brick, and more than just building products, we are a foundation for today's lifestyle and a leader for today's style. We manufacture a wide range of building products like no other, local and international innovation, sourced from around the world to exceed customer expectations. Bricks, roof tiles, pavers, masonry blocks and retaining walls, precast concrete, concrete sleepers, stone. Distinctive and luxurious products, beautiful products that stand the test of time. Our pursuits have no borders. We continue to expand internationally with an increasing portfolio of brands in North America, including Glen-Gery, Sioux City Brick, Lawrenceville and Cushwa. More than just building, we're building with confidence. Sustainable manufacturing and products that are shaping our future. We are committed to conducting business that best serves the interest of the community and the building industry, so that we create strong and enduring relationships. Brick continues to inspire some of the most incredible architecture and engineering around the world. Designed and developed through product partnerships with leading architects. Custom and bespoke products for endless design creativity. We are helping to shape the architectural landscape. Sustainable, distinctive, robust, customizable, building the impossible and turning designs into reality. Everlasting expressions of colour, texture and form. Not just a building process, but an intimate and personal statement of style, colour and lifestyle commitment. Constructing places of creativity, hubs of inspiration, places of possibilities. Our design studios continue to evolve. Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, Hobart, Perth, and coming soon, Philadelphia and New York. Providing a one-stop shop for products, design advice, industry-leading events and thought leadership discussions. Attracting like-minded individuals, creating partnerships, inspiring style, informing thoughts and evolving our industry. Over 110 years of experience, a suite of market-leading brands, building inspiration and innovation with an unmatched standing of style. This is Brickworks.
Time is a curious thing. It flies by, and it stands still. What we do with our time says a lot. Do we waste it? Savor it. Only time will tell. Cushwa Brick by Glen-Gery. Time-tested, craft perfected.
They're bold, unique, distinct, and extraordinary. They speak, build, save, and never, ever rest. No wonder the things they make are classic, modern, and beautiful. Each handmade brick by Glen-Gery is individually shaped, uniquely textured, and richly colored, all to create a look that is unmistakably you. Meticulously crafted to imperfect perfection, they combine to create something truly greater than the sum of their parts. Brick unlike any other. Brick that enhances every project, any project, and lends modern looks to a classic material. Brick that outdoes every other. Handmade brick by Glen-Gery. Character beyond compare.
Strong, secure, everlasting, innovative, resilient, stylish. Throughout the past 110 years, the face of building materials has continued to evolve. We're here for a lifetime of living. This is Brickworks. More than brick, and more than just building products, we are a foundation for today's lifestyle and a leader for today's style. We manufacture a wide range of building products like no other, local and international innovation, sourced from around the world to exceed customer expectations. Bricks, roof tiles, pavers, masonry blocks and retaining walls, precast concrete, concrete sleepers, stone. Distinctive and luxurious products, beautiful products that stand the test of time. Our pursuits have no borders. We continue to expand internationally with an increasing portfolio of brands in North America, including Glen-Gery, Sioux City Brick, Lawrenceville and Cushwa. More than just building, we're building with confidence. Sustainable manufacturing and products that are shaping our future. We are committed to conducting business that best serves the interest of the community and the building industry, so that we create strong and enduring relationships. Brick continues to inspire some of the most incredible architecture and engineering around the world. Designed and developed through product partnerships with leading architects. Custom and bespoke products for endless design creativity. We are helping to shape the architectural landscape. Sustainable, distinctive, robust, customizable, building the impossible and turning designs into reality. Everlasting expressions of colour, texture and form. Not just a building process, but an intimate and personal statement of style, colour and lifestyle commitment. Constructing places of creativity, hubs of inspiration, places of possibilities. Our design studios continue to evolve. Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, Hobart, Perth, and coming soon, Philadelphia and New York. Providing a one-stop shop for products, design advice, industry-leading events and thought leadership discussions. Attracting like-minded individuals, creating partnerships, inspiring style, informing thoughts and evolving our industry. Over 110 years of experience, a suite of market-leading brands, building inspiration and innovation with an unmatched standing of style. This is Brickworks.
Time is a curious thing. It flies by, and it stands still. What we do with our time says a lot. Do we waste it? Savor it. Only time will tell. Cushwa Brick by Glen-Gery. Time-tested, craft perfected.
They're bold, unique, distinct, and extraordinary. They speak, build, save, and never, ever rest. No wonder the things they make are classic, modern, and beautiful. Each handmade brick by Glen-Gery is individually shaped, uniquely textured, and richly colored, all to create a look that is unmistakably you. Meticulously crafted to imperfect perfection, they combine to create something truly greater than the sum of their parts. Brick unlike any other. Brick that enhances every project, any project, and lends modern looks to a classic material. Brick that outdoes every other. Handmade brick by Glen-Gery. Character beyond compare.
All right. Happy Thursday, everybody. I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy. Welcome to Beyond the Brick with Ben Safren, our Business Development Manager. And my name is Brian Yansak, and I'm the Design Studio and Events Coordinator for Glen-Gery. Just a little housekeeping before we get ready. Today's webinar is a AIA accredited course for 1 LU and HSW credit. For those of you that registered with your AIA number, you will be submitted for credit, and everybody participating for the entirety of today's webinar will also be getting a certificate of completion within the next 2 business days. Today's session will also be recorded, and a link to that recorded video will be on your certificate of completion. And also during today's webinar, you'll notice a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Please feel free to go ahead and submit any questions throughout the presentation as you see fit. And at its conclusion, we will have a Q&A section for you as well. So I would now like to introduce our speaker today, Ben Safren. So Ben, if you could please share your screen with us. Ben is an experienced technical sales representative. No, thanks, Ben. And demonstrated history of working in the building materials industry, specializing in the components of a wall system. Beginning his career in business development, Ben has collaborated with architects, contractors, and many of the largest manufacturers on a number of masonry projects in the Mid-Atlantic region. A graduate of James Madison University in Harrisburg, Virginia, Ben holds a bachelor's degree of business administration. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to you, Ben.
Thank you, Brian, and welcome to everyone joining us on the call today. We appreciate you all carving out a few minutes of your busy day to join us and learn with Glen-Gery. So I'm going to jump right into things. One of the reasons I'm excited to speak with you all today is because if you were able to log into our Zoom meeting a few minutes early, there's a chance you caught a glimpse of some of our recent advertisements promoting our products that we're really excited about. Now, if you didn't get a chance to see them, head on over to YouTube, type in Glen-Gery, or you can go directly to our website, glengery.com, and take a look there. Promise you I won't be offended if I don't have your full attention in the early stages, but if you want to do that now, I'll just go over a few housekeeping items. So copyright materials, this presentation is protected by US and international copyright laws. Reproduction, distribution, display, and use of the presentation without written permission of the speaker is prohibited. Brian mentioned this is AIA accredited. Certificates of completion for non-AIA members are available on request. All right, so allow me to paint a quick picture for those of you that may not be too familiar with Glen-Gery. We've been manufacturing brick in America for well over 100 years. And about 2 years ago, we were acquired by an Australian company called Brickworks. Now, since that's happened, we've been exposed to all new forms and applications of masonry, many of which we didn't even think existed before. So with our expanded product line combined with the symbiosis of really 2 parts of the world coming together and sharing knowledge and resources, what we're getting is innovation in the form of these extraordinary projects coming out of your offices. So it's an exciting time in the masonry world, and we're seeing the overall perspective of bricks really evolve from that traditional commodity outlook to a more modern contemporary look, especially in North America. We understand that it all starts with you, the people on the front end actually designing these buildings, and we're just happy to be a part of that process. So the purpose of today is simply trying to promote masonry. Our slogan, which actually comes from Australia, is beautiful products that last forever. So going back to the reason I'm excited to speak with you all today is because what we're going to discuss is actually how we allow these beautiful products to last forever. Or in more formal terms, how we achieve optimal building performance. So if you take a look at your screen now, the chart here shows the 2 major components when designing your building with masonry construction. On the left-hand side, you have the aesthetics portion. This is the exterior cladding, which is usually the first people the first thing people see. So naturally, we spend a lot of time and effort on the color, the look, the feel. I also refer to this side as the fun part. This is where you can really explore the creative ideas to make a lasting impression for your customer. When you think about brick, one of the selling points is the longevity associated with masonry buildings. So whether you're designing a home for a family, a church, maybe an office space, these structures are meant to last a very long time. The expectation is that these brick buildings will be around much longer than you or I. So without sounding too cheesy, in a way, these buildings are your footprint on the world, your lasting legacy for yourself and for your firm. So we want to support you as the artist by providing you the tools, the paint and the brush, or I should say the brick and the mortar in this case. But we also want to give you the ease of mind to know that the outside of your building is going to look the same in 200 years as it does on day one. And that's where we focus our attention on the right side of the screen, the optimal building performance. So the two key words here, compatibility and installability, these are going to be our main themes of everything we discussed today. So I want you to keep these in mind as we go through everything. From a compatibility standpoint, I want you to look at it from an architectural standpoint. So things like updating your specifications, understanding the latest product offerings from manufacturers, and how those fit into the new codes. Codes are constantly changing. We understand as architects, you're dealing with hundreds of things at once. And I can tell you personally, as someone that only deals with masonry, one of the biggest challenges we see is keeping up with all the new product launches and again, how they fit with the new codes. So maybe you have an in-house spec writer that helps you out. Maybe you hired an outside wall consultant. Maybe you're using software like Master Spec or just recycling specs from old jobs. Either way, I believe most of us would agree that at some point we put some responsibility on the contractor to ultimately do the right thing. And that leads me to our second term, installability. Now I realize this isn't an actual word. It's a term we've actually coined to describe the emphasis of the masonry contractor's preferences. Here's the issue we're facing. As manufacturers continue to innovate products, it's becoming easier and easier to install. And this has resulted in a labor pool that has been not quite as skilled as what we've become accustomed to in the history of masonry. Going along with that, and despite what this picture is representing, we're not seeing a lot of young people eager to lay brick. In fact, the average bricklayer in the US is said to be around 55 years old. And like many of us, they're creatures of habit. So chances are they're using old school methods that don't necessarily work as well with the new systems and technology that we have available. Now, that isn't necessarily a bad thing. I actually always promote the idea of not recreating the wheel, but that shouldn't warrant us giving them too much liberty because at the end of the day, they're running a business. This is how they make their living. And given the opportunity to cut costs, it's likely that they will explore that option and use potentially inferior products. So it's up to the architect and the designer to point their contractors in the right direction and allow their masons to do what they do best. So where does Glen-Gery fit into all this? Well, like I mentioned, we manufactured brick in America for over a century. Given our long-standing relationship with mason contractors, we've acquired a unique understanding of the products and material going behind the brick that are not only compatible, but also efficient and workable. So we took that knowledge and we partnered with the manufacturers that we believe were offering the best resources and products. And eventually we found ourselves in a great position to become a resource for architects. So essentially, if you can subscribe to the notion that in order for us to achieve optimal building performance, we must consider industry best practices from a manufacturing standpoint, while also considering the proclivity of the contractor, then you've come to the right place. And with that in mind, let me set a quick format for today's discussion. First, we're going to go through each component of the wall as we see it structured in many specifications. I'll be providing a quick overview of each component. I'll describe why it's important, and then I'll offer some industry best practices based on our unique perspective. After that, we'll have some time at the end for questions, as Brian mentioned. And finally, I'd like to finish by introducing a resource that I'm really excited about, and it will bring everything we learned together today in a simple, user-friendly manner. Now, I will note I broke these components up into 5 major categories. It's important to note that every building is going to be different, but these are pretty consistent in what we see in today's masonry applications. You could even argue that each of these components deserves a full seminar on themselves. So with that in mind, we're going to be covering a lot of information and moving very quickly. The goal here It's not to become experts necessarily, but just to learn a little bit about everything so ultimately we can point our contractors in the right direction. And let me just say, I realize these might not be the most interesting topics with all that's going on in the world. Many of you are probably hoping I would just show some pictures of our beautiful brick and we could go about our days, but I promise if you stick with me over the course of the next 30 minutes or so, you're going to be able to take one or two things away from this that maybe you're familiar with, or maybe it's been lost in the dust over years, but you can take them back to your team, improve your specifications, and ultimately continue designing beautiful buildings that are meant to last forever. So without further ado, let's jump right into this. So as we look through Division 4 unit masonry, the first item we typically see when it comes to the accessories, it's usually listed right after the brick and mortar, is joint reinforcement. So we'll be discussing the misconceptions involved with the shape and sizes of reinforcement, but let me first describe what the purpose is. So I'm actually from Virginia, home to many of the top schools in the country. And for most of those schools in the area, and really throughout the country for that matter, the backup or the structure of the building tends to be block, or as some people refer to it as, CMU. When constructing a CMU wall system with a brick veneer, the basic idea here is we want to pull the weight of the wall to our backup. The most effective way to do so with block backups is joint reinforcement. The system was introduced in the 1960s as an alternative to masonry headers, and the goal was simple. We wanted to limit the wall cracking associated with thermal and moisture movements. So if you take anything away from this, let it be this. Brick expands over time where concrete block actually shrinks, so we must account for these differing movements in order to limit that cracking of the brick. So there's two types of joint reinforcement. There's ladder and truss. In the beginning, truss was the norm for masonry walls. That, however, changed in the 1990s with the introduction to vertical reinforcement, or as many of us refer to as rebar. You can see most masonry applications today, engineers are calling for vertical rebar or grouted walls. Now, according to NCMA, or the National Concrete Masonry Association, because the diagonal cross wires may interfere with the placement of vertical reinforcing steel or grout, truss-type joint reinforcement should not be used in reinforced or grouted walls. So for that reason, we've seen a shift towards the ladder-type reinforcement, and in this case, it's actually a little bit cheaper, so this is considered industry best practice. Here's another look at it. You can see here we're clearly with that extra wire length in the truss that if you were to have rebar here, it could cause some issues. But just to describe this, we have our ladder laying down, our hook is coming out, we have these little eyes, and then we call it a hook and eye pintle, so the hooks are then installed after the insulation, flashing everything else in the cavity wall. Now, the other common error we tend to see with reinforcement involves the thickness of the wire. Joint reinforcement is available in standard 9 gauge as well as 3/16 inch, and we refer to that as heavy duty. Now, we get that 3/16 because code allows for the maximum wire diameter to be 1/2 of a mortar joint thickness. While our mortar joint's 3/8, if you break that up in half, you get 3/16. Now, many of you are probably thinking, well, maximum wire diameter means maximum effectiveness, but not so fast. We must consider the rule of installability. So according to a recent study by Dan Zeichmeister, he's the executive director of the Michigan Masonry Institute, there are compelling reasons to use the smaller 9 gauge wire, and most of that has to do with the variance that code allows for our mortar joint. So consider this. As I mentioned, a standard mortar joint is 3/8 of an inch. Code allows for a variance of plus or minus 1/8 of an inch. That means our mortar joint is acceptable by code at 1/2 an inch or 1/4 of an inch. Now, 1/2, you're going to be fine to use this extra heavy duty wire, but consider using a quarter inch mortar joint. So just doing a little math here, we can take that 1/4, expand it to 4/16. Well, we're placing a 3/16 ladder wire in the middle of that. That essentially leaves us with 1/16 of an inch of mortar joint coverage. Then you have to take into account other factors, because I'll mention this a few times today, but nothing ever goes as planned when you get to the job site. So things like the variability of the galvanization process, the CMU block is never quite smooth, all of these things, and we're playing with fire here by only using 1/16 of an inch mortar joint. So the problem with this is you could literally end up with blocks sitting on top of wire, and this pretty much defeats the purpose of what we're trying to accomplish here. So long story short, essentially by using or specifying heavy duty wire, you're putting an unnecessary accountability on the contractor to ensure that mortar coverage. And this does not adhere to our rule of installability. Again, the theme of today's discussion. So as best said by Mario J. Catani of the Masonry Construction Magazine, one compelling reason to use 9-gauge reinforcement is for its fix or fit and constructability. He goes on to say in regards to extra heavy duty wire, use it only when there is no other choice. So for those of you jotting down notes, let me keep things pretty simple when it comes to joint reinforcement. We like to see standard 9-gauge by 9-gauge and ladder type. So that's pretty simple. That's one component down. Not so bad. We're going to move on to our second topic, adjustable veneer anchors and ties, or as I like to call them, brick ties. Now, the basic idea behind brick ties is the same as horizontal joint reinforcement. The difference here, I should say, is going to be our backup structure. So I mentioned joint reinforcement being the ideal form of tying brick back in a CMU wall application. This is going to be your best solution when you have a wood framed wall or a steel stud wall. Now, obviously, we can't use that joint reinforcement because there's no block to lay the ladder on. And the reason I bring that up is because we are seeing the use of brick ties used more oftenly in CMU wall applications. I say that not to confuse anyone, but just it is an option out there. I want to make that clear. All right, so according to the Brick Industry Association, or BIA as most of us know it, there are 3 basic functions of a brick tie. Number 1 is providing a connection. So in order to do so, the anchor must securely attach to both the brick veneer as well as the backup. So you'll notice each of these ties on the right have some sort of plate or barrel that connects to the backup, and then some sort of triangle tie, hook, pintle. They have a bunch of different names, and that's going to be embedded into our mortar joint and attach our brick. The second is transferring lateral loads. So again, the purpose here is to place the weight of the wall on our backup. Now, if you consider lateral loads, an extreme example would be if you're driving your car and you brake fast, all of the lateral load is transferred to the front wheels. So the same concept goes here. We want the weight of the wall pulled back to our structure so the brick veneer doesn't fall forward. The last one here is the ability to handle differential movement, or in some cases, restrain differential movement. As we talked about, our walls do move over time, brick expands. So we must allow for the movement to limit cracking in the brick. Now, I did want to add a 4th function here, and this has come about as continuous insulation becomes more prevalent. Manufacturers are being forced to consider all penetrations into our insulation. So you're starting to see brick ties made with some form of sealers or an EPDM washer, something along those lines. You can see it here. And it works in conjunction with the insulation to ensure that it is continuous. So when we penetrate the insulation, we're sealing it right behind it. And that becomes especially important when we talk about brick ties that are installed after the insulation is installed. And that leads me to my next slide, which is the main point I want you guys to take away from today's discussion about brick ties. So there are hundreds and maybe thousands of different brick ties. There's benefits and disadvantages to all of them. We're not going to go through all of that today. We're going to keep it in 2 categories. So if you're writing down notes, this is a good thing to consider. When you're specifying brick ties, you must consider what insulation is being used in the cavity wall. So this is another great example of you, the designer, the architect. You can point your contractor in the right direction. As the saying goes, lead your horse to water and allow them to drink. So in this case, we have inboard ties and outboard ties. Now, I do want to mention these terms are not universally used in our industry, so be careful when you toss them around, but the idea behind them is pretty simple and self-explanatory. We have ties installed before the installation and ties installed after the installation. The best way to describe this is with a video. So I'm going to play this for you and talk it through. So you have your studs. We're going to put sheathing up, air barrier, flashing, and we're going to come in with an inboard tie and screw it directly to our studs. The 2 screws here should have some form of EPDM washer to seal the penetration because we need our air barrier to be continuous. Now here's the interesting point going back to insulation. Our ties are spaced 16 inches on center. So we can't just throw up a 4x8 board of insulation. We need to use 16 inches sheets of insulation. You'll see those come on now. And what does that mean? That means we're going to have more joints here in our insulation, which requires more detailing. But coming back to the ties, we're going to lay a bed of mortar. Our hook goes halfway through our brick. So if you have a modular brick, you're going to go 2 inches into that and finish up the job. So again, what I want you to take away from that is the insulation. The other option we have here is outboard, so ties that are installed after the insulation. And here's the interesting point. When we think of a compatibility standpoint, it might be obvious that by penetrating our insulation, the outboard tie could reduce our efforts to achieve CI. But again, that's why we have that fourth function. So we add some form of EPDM washer. You can see that very clearly here. So we're going to penetrate the insulation and the air barrier. What I love about this specific tie, a barrel tie, is that it has a sealer for the air barrier and then a sealer for the insulation here. So it covers both penetrations, which is very useful. But again, back to the insulation. In this case, we're going to be able to install a 4x8 board of insulation. So for instance, XPS insulation, which we'll talk about later, and polyiso, they come in 4x8 boards. So you're actually limiting the amount of joints that you need to detail in your insulation. And this is very effective when it comes to achieving CI, which has become a big topic in recent years. That being said, some insulation is only available in 16-inch sheets. The best example of that is mineral wool. So here's kind of what we consider best practices. If you're going to use mineral wool or spray foam, we recommend an inboard tie. If you're going to use XPS or polyiso insulation, we recommend an outboard tie. But again, we don't want to pigeonhole our masons. We want to allow them to do what they do best. So here's a great way you could word your spec. In this case, we offer both options. We give them the option of an outboard tie, which is what they might be more used to, or maybe they're more used to the inboard tie. That said, we can also include the sentence here. Option A is recommended with the use of XPS and polyiso. Inboard ties, option B, is recommended with mineral wool and spray foam. So again, we're pointing them in the right direction and allowing them to take it in their own hands. So one more thing about ties, I would be remiss not to mention, we are doing a full webinar on ties in about 2 weeks. We'll have that information at the end, but there's a lot more to cover here. If you're interested in this topic, be sure to sign up for that webinar. So moving on to our third component, we're doing pretty good on time here. Through wall flashing is our third component. And if I had to argue which section was most important for today's discussion, I would probably argue it'd be this one. So when it comes to our theme today, compatibility and installability, flashing tends to offer the most glaring reasons to consider both options. So why is flashing so important? Well, according to this recent study from Zurich Construction, 80% of all construction-related claims in the United States come from uncontrolled water penetrations and condensation. So for those of you that don't know, Zurich's one of the largest insurance companies in the construction industry, so they have a unique perspective on this. If you ask any mason, they'll tell you the biggest enemy to brick is going to be water. And the primary function of flashing is to divert water outside of the wall. So for that reason, I'd argue this is a very important, if not the most important component of our wall makeup. So when we are planning on controlling our wall, we must account for water, air, vapor, and thermal effects. That said, water is going to be our biggest enemy. As best stated by Dr. Joe Steberk of the Building Science, you won't ever receive a call at 3 a.m. because your building is leaking air. So again, we want to specify flashing that's going to give the wall our best opportunity to succeed in its effort to effectively control water. All right, so when we're thinking about flashing, we need to consider the following physical properties. Number one should be pretty obvious. The flashing must be water resistant. We also want it to be durable and resistant to puncturing and tearing. Key point here, we're only as strong as our weakest point in the wall. The worst thing that can happen to our flashing is when holes are poked through it or there's a tear. So we really want a strong material. We also want our flashing to be UV resistant. It will be exposed to the sun at some point during the installation. And the last two on the page are very important. Flashing is considered a system. So it must be compatible with all other components it comes in contact with. And this includes not only your sealants and adhesives, but also your insulation, your air barrier, and everything else that it comes in contact with. So you'd think that, you know, in the year 2020, there wouldn't be products available in the market that aren't compatible with each other. But we're learning more and more about compatibility every year. and manufacturers are trying to keep up. But that said, there are still many products in the market now that are considered outdated because of their compatibility issues. Last point here, we want our flashing to last a very long time. In the beginning of this seminar, I mentioned one of the selling points of selecting masonry for our exterior cladding is the longevity associated with it. So we want to make sure our flashing is going to last the life of the wall. When it comes to restoration masons, I can tell you the only reason they're still in business is because of flashing defaults. There's really no easy way to replace flashing. So essentially you have to tear down the brick and start from scratch. So this is not an area where you want to cut costs. When you think about replacing flashing, the average cost to replace flashing at the base level is $300 per linear foot. Again, there's really no easy way to go about it. That being said, that's at the base of the wall. So think about a high rise. I mentioned I live right outside DC. We see it all the time. If you're replacing flashing above a windowsill, it's on the 30th floor, you have to account for the scaffolding costs that go into that cost. So that $300 could end up being doubled, tripled, if not more. So when it comes to flashing, you want to do it right the first time. We like to say, build your wall once, build it right. So like brick ties, there are many types of flashing available in the market. Let me be the first to say, there are no bad flashings. Any flashing is going to be better than nothing. But with that in mind, the best way to explain the thought process when you're specifying a flashing is to compare the following three options, which are widely used in the States. So as we go through this, keep in mind the theme of our discussion today, installability and compatibility. So let's start with a good option, 40 mil rubberized asphalt, or as our masons like to call it, peel and stick flashing. Now, this is the most common product in the market, and just about every manufacturer offers some sort of peel and stick flashing. You can see the durability and tear resistance of this product are very solid, but masons ultimately really love this product for the flexibility involved with it. And I just got a note, so I'm going to try to hide this really quick. All right, we should be good. But again, back to an installability aspect, this product is flexible, so it involves a great opportunity for our masons to succeed. Unfortunately, this flashing does not adhere to our rule of compatibility, and we can see that here in the compatibility chart. Looking at your screen now, the colors indicate the compatibility with commonly used insulations and air barriers. This chart lists the types of flashings on the left-hand side of your screen, and then we have our air barriers on the top. So you can see here we got some red boxes, some yellow boxes, all informed with rubberized asphalt peel and stick. So when you're specifying this material, you need to be extra careful about what air barriers are also being specified and what insulation you're using. This could cause some unnecessary stress for you. And when it comes to compatibility issues, what it ultimately comes down to peel and stick flashing is the asphalt. And we're seeing asphalt in general being phased out of the industry as a whole. The big reason for that is compatibility issues. And an example of that would be what you see here on the right-hand side of your screen. So if you've never seen this, I'd urge you to look around your town next time you go for a walk. What you're seeing on the left-hand side of your screen is the makeup of a standard 40 mil rubberized asphalt. The workforce of the flashing here is going to be your 8 mils of polyethylene sheet, but the product really gets its durability from the 24 mils of asphalt. Now here's the issue. Asphalt melts at about 160 degrees. Now you always want to include a drip edge for your flashing, and this is shown here. Its purpose is to make sure the water is being diverted off of the wall and not finding its way back in. But with rubberized asphalt, you have no other choice. You have to use a drip edge because it's UV sensitive. So this product can't be exposed to the sun. So we use a copper or stainless steel drip edge, both great conductors of heat. In fact, they double the temperature outside. So think of a 80-degree day, which we see a lot of in Virginia. The drip edge is heating the flashing to 160 degrees. And what you get is essentially your flashing turning to liquid and seeping out of your walls. So not only does this make your building ugly, but more importantly, now you're just left with this 8 mils of polyethylene sheet. And that's going to be your biggest defense against our biggest enemy of brick, which is water. So to put it in perspective, a dollar bill is about 5 mils thick. And when it comes to the importance of water penetration, it's tough to bet against this product. And again, we want a lifetime warranty product. With this product, most manufacturers offer about a 5 to 20 year warranty. I don't want to speak for you all, but I don't think any of us are designing brick buildings to last 20 years. So essentially, to sum up this option, it's great. It's a very good option from an installability factor. It checks the box. From a compatibility factor, there's plenty of room to be weary. So let's jump to a better option. Right away, we're addressing the compatibility issues associated with the rubberized asphalt. Rigid sheet metal is made out of copper and stainless steel, both noble metals and both compatible with all other materials. So when we think back to the compatibility chart, you can rest easy knowing that no matter what insulation you're using or air barrier, your flashing is going to be compatible. So let's check the box here for compatibility and take our attention to the second part of our theme, installability. So let me be the first to say, when it comes to this flashing, when it's done correctly, this is going to be your Cadillac of through-wall flashing. This is the best of the best. I mentioned durability being very important. Well, this is very hard to tear, very hard to puncture. With that in mind, it's not uncommon for this option to be installed poorly. So here's the issue. Sheet metal is prefabricated. Although we all plan and hope for our walls to be exactly how we design them, like I mentioned earlier, the reality is nothing ever goes as planned when you get to the job site. So we see this happen often. The flashing doesn't actually meet the measurements needed for the wall. And when this happens, contractors, who I should mention are usually paid by the hour, they don't respond appropriately when the measurements don't add up. Instead, they go with what they're used to, what they know, which is usually a peel and stick flashing. So they take that out and finish up the system that way. Like I mentioned earlier, our flashing is only as strong as our weakest link. So you just paid for a lifetime warranty product, but instead you got a 5 to 20 year product. As one of my mentors like to say about this quick fix, it's like putting bicycle tires on a Lamborghini. I always thought that was a good way to put it. Now, one other issue with the rigid sheet metal is the laps in joints. Traditionally, we would like to see the joints soldered. Sealants and adhesives don't perform properly with the rigid sheet. That said, we have seen the rise of flashing tape or flexible stainless steel tape being used on the laps. So if you're going to use this option, that's a great application method for the tape on the rigid sheet. Now, with all that being said, rigid sheet metal, it's an excellent form of through-wall flashing, great from a compatibility standpoint, but when it comes to installability, there's room for doubt. So in a perfect world, we could combine the compatibility components of the sheet metal flashing with the installability factor of the rubberized asphalt, and it just so happens that we have that option, which is what industry best practices confirm as our best option, flexible stainless steel flashing. Now, this option checks all the boxes. It's a noble metal, so naturally it's extremely durable. The tear resistance is excellent. It's about 3 times stronger than peel and stick. And like rigid sheet, this product offers a lifetime warranty system. It's compatible with all other materials, and like rubberized asphalt, it's flexible, so it can bend its shape easily. And this is very important when we have unique flashing situations like shelf angles or oddly shaped windows. It's much easier to use something like this than a rigid sheet metal. One thing I didn't mention about rubberized asphalt, if you have an air gap that's bigger than 1/4 of an inch, which it absolutely should be, it should be 1 inch or recommended 2 inch, you actually have to reinforce that peel and stick flashing, because over time it starts to droop and you get a pool liner type situation going on there. With this flexible stainless steel, you can span the gap, whether it's 2 inches, 3 inches, whatever it is, it's going to hold its shape. So it's a great option there, and it's available in sticky back versions as well. I will note it's also UV resistant, so you can actually bring this flashing flush to the wall and eliminate that drip edge. Now, we always want the drip edge, but there are some situations, we see it with elementary schools where the drip edge might have a sharp angle at the corner. It's prefabricated, so sometimes it doesn't match up too well. So you got kids running around, and that could be a hazard if you have that drip edge sticking out. So instead, you could use the flexible stainless steel and bring it flush to the wall. Back to our compatibility chart, you can see the bottom 4 here are stainless steel, all of which green boxes across the table. So if you're asking me, this is a no-brainer. The way we like to see it listed in a specification is as you see it here. So you'll notice that some masons still prefer the rigid sheet metal. So we allow that option up here. Sorry, clicked a little too fast. But the point here is knowing that the labor costs and the material costs are much higher than a flexible stainless steel. If your mason decides to use rigid sheet, it's probably a great indicator that you have a great mason. So we leave that option for them if they want to use it, but we give them the flexible stainless steel and then the sticky back version, again, making it easier. Masons are creatures of habit, so if they're used to using a peel and stick, this is an easy transition. Now, I do want to mention we always want to mechanically fasten our flashing, and we do that with a termination bar. You'll see here, one of these term bars has a flange here, whereas this one's just a flat surface. This flange is meant for caulking purposes, so we always want to include that in our specification. You'd be surprised, or some of you might be surprised to note that this product's actually a little bit cheaper than the flat term bar. You wonder why some products even exist. That tends to happen a lot in the masonry world, and we see that with cavity drainage. So here's one more thing when it comes to flashing. Our cavity drainage is used in the air gap. It fills that full air gap, and the idea is we want to break up mortar droppings to allow water to flow freely to our weaves. Now, the purpose of the dovetail is to break it up so mortar doesn't pile up. But here's the ugly side of our business. One manufacturer had a patent on this design for years and years. So in an effort to compete, other manufacturers came up with a straight strip product, which ultimately just raises the dam. So instead of your mortar drying up and stiffening at the bottom, it's just going to pile up right here. So one of those things where when we do specification reviews, this is usually the first thing I look for. It's very common. So I recommend you going back and checking out your specs. We like to see something like this. So with the term bar, we like the sealant flange at the top. And with the cavity drainage, we like the dovetail shaped notches. All right, so on to our fourth component. And that's, in most cases, is going to require us to jump over to Division 7, thermal insulation. Now, when it comes to insulation and specifying the right material, it's not as cut and dry as flashing, and ultimately where you're located throughout the country based on the environment and so forth, that's what's going to determine what system works best. So we'll be discussing the 4 most common types of insulation and the basic characteristics of each. And the goal here is really just to understand what options are available so that you can decide what works best for your building. Quick history lesson, insulation has been around a long time, dating back to the 1800s in England. That said, it didn't really make its way to the US until the 1970 oil embargo. And that changed energy codes, which forced us to rethink the way our cavity walls are structured. So if you look at buildings built in the 40s, 50s, 60s, most of them are structurally great. They're built out of 3 or 4 widths of brick, but they don't have insulation. And with today's application, we do a better job of managing moisture. So when it comes to the characteristics of insulation, we're going to look at 4 components. First and foremost, the whole idea of thermal insulation is to improve on energy. We want to keep the warm air in during colder weather and cold air inside during the warmer months. The way we measure thermal performance is R value, which determines thermal resistance of a material. I'll show you a map on the next slide that actually breaks down where you're at in the country, depending on what zone you're in. But ultimately, that's going to determine what R value you want to look for. Now, the second component is fire performance. This has become increasingly relevant in the last 5 years. Most of us are aware that the Grenfell Tower fire in London, that occurred in 2017. And originally, it was thought that the insulation in the wall was the primary cause for the spread of the fire. After further investigation, it was confirmed that the system as a whole was simply not up to today's construction standards. And most of the blame was ended up put on the exterior cladding, which in that case was metal panels. So if you're asking me, not necessarily an employee of Glen-Gery, but just as an observer, I would say it was absolutely the metal panels' fault. There's no doubt about it. But in all seriousness, this was a tragedy. Many people did lose their lives. So like everything, there was some positivity that came from it. It forced manufacturers to open their eyes, and it pushed them to reevaluate the way we're making products. So we now require fire rating tests, and the most popular is the NFPA 285. One thing to remember about NFPA 285. This is an Assemblies test. So just about every manufacturer will tell you that their product is NFPA 285 approved. But when it really comes down to it, you need to account for the brick ties, the reinforcement, flashing, air barrier, everything that's going in that cavity falls under the NFPA 285 requirements. Insulation is also part of the fight against moisture. Again, water is our biggest enemy. So I mentioned already the shift that took place in the 70s. We now see our cavity walls using exterior insulation along with an air gap to allow water to travel freely to our flashing. So code calls for a 1-inch minimum air gap. BIA actually recommends a 2-inch minimum air gap. Now the last characteristic here is thickness. Think back to the term lateral load. So we want the weight of the wall on our backup structure. And when the cavity space is thinner, we're more likely to accomplish that goal. So you want to consider R value here. Ideally, you want to specify insulation with higher R values so that you're using less material in order to keep our cavity concise. With that said, there are new codes that are being released in 2021, and they're requiring higher R values. So with that, we're going to see our cavity spaces start to widen. In the past, code has allowed for a maximum total cavity space, meaning the dimension from the face of our backup wall to the backside of a veneer, it had a maximum dimension of 4.5 inches. Well, that number is increasing to 6.5 inches with the rise of R value being insisted upon by the code. So that's going to affect everything, our reinforcement, our brick ties, and just because it's something that is going to be prevalent doesn't necessarily mean we should be making our insulation wider. So again, R value, here's the zones based on where you're at in the country. You want to base that on R value. The R value is the exterior insulation along with the bat insulation, and there's even insulation in the CMU wall block that combines that. Here's our 4 insulation types that we'll go through and their R values. We'll break down each one. So first things first, XPS. This is traditionally the most familiar product on the market, and this is your typical blue, pink, or green board. The basic idea behind extruded polystyrene, it's manufactured through an extrusion process that involves melting together the plastic resin and other ingredients, and the liquid form is then extruded through a die, and it expands during the cooling process. So one of the advantages you can see here, thinking back to our brick ties, is the ability to use 4x8 boards. This is available in 4x8, so we can limit the amount of joints in our CI. The big concern here is with fire. Again, we must always account for our full assembly. One aspect about XPS that often gets overlooked involves windows and door headers. So according to NFPA 285 compliance, XPS requires more complicated fire protective details, such as steel angle and mineral wool, to protect the insulation from flashover during a fire. So be aware of that. If you do decide to go with an XPS, you have to consider the windows and door headers. You probably want to add some form of mineral wool, which happens to be our next slide. So for you green builders out there, this is made out of complete recycled content. So if you're looking for a LEED building, this is a great option. But ultimately, the big selling point of mineral wool is that it's non-combustible. So with the rise of fire ratings, mineral wool can really withstand extreme heat better than any other insulation type. You could literally hold a lighter up to this stuff and it doesn't burn. So that's where it gets its big advantage. From a disadvantage standpoint, this is a great product, but most of the disadvantages really involve masonry applications. So thinking back to our brick ties, it's only available in 16-inch sheets, so we need to account for more joints in our system. And it's very hard to use an outboard tie with mineral wool. So this material, it's not necessarily spongy-like, but has some similar qualities. So you think about if you squeeze or pinch together a sponge, it compresses. Well, the same idea goes for this. If you use an outboard tie and penetrate this insulation, it compresses and it opens up gaps in your wall cavity. So it's going to limit your opportunity to achieve CI. Just something to consider, but this is a great product. The next one we have is polyiso. Most of us are familiar with this product as a roofing insulation, but it's great in the cavity walls as well. Like XPS, it's considered a foam plastic board. The difference is that polyiso is considered thermosetting plastic, whereas XPS is considered thermoplastic. This pretty much means that polyiso, once it hardens, it can't go back to its liquid form. And the belief here is that that improves with fire ratings. Depending on the manufacturer, polyiso offers an R value between 6 and 6.5, so excellent R value there. And the facers are typically foil-faced or fiberglass, both of which help massively with moisture management. One aspect I do want to include with polyiso, this is unique and pretty recent. When it's detailed correctly, and that includes taping the joints and flashing, liquid flashing around the corners, it can be installed as an air barrier as well. So that eliminates one step in the process. That's a big selling point there. Not too many negatives here. There have been some tests that show that the R value diminishes in some, 50 degrees or under, but that really comes back to the manufacturer. So you want to make sure you get all your compatibility letters when you're specifying products. Something to consider when you're reaching an R10. Again, we want to keep our walls thinner, ideally. Polyiso, you can do 1.5 inch, whereas XPS would be 2 inch. Mineral wool, you'd have to do 2.5 inches. Our last one here is spray foam. The big selling point here is that it acts as an air barrier and allows us to skip that step of installing the air barrier, which often holds jobs up. I'd argue this one is a lot like the rigid sheet metal flashing. When it's done correctly, this is going to be your best opportunity to achieve CI. But let's think about our brick ties. So if you were using an outboard tie here and we want to use that EPDM washer to seal the penetration, look at the waves here. This stuff is very hard to keep consistent thickness, so it's going to be hard to seal that penetration. And what happens when we use inboard ties is sometimes the stuff cures and it actually covers up our inboard tie. So when you come back to put the hook in and build your veneer, our masons are forced to chip away at this stuff, which can be a real pain. I will mention this stuff gets very hot and it does come in contact with your flashing. So you want a noble metal flashing specifically. A great option would be that stainless steel we talked about. All right, looks like we're doing pretty good on time here and we're on to our last topic, saving the best for last. Let me begin this portion with a small disclaimer. The unique position that we find ourselves in as brick manufacturers that gives us the understanding of best practices based on the unique experience with masons, it doesn't necessarily apply here. Most cases, masons aren't actually installing air barriers. They usually sub this portion out. But more importantly, the concept of air barriers is very new, especially in the States. So we first saw these in 1980s. They came up in Canadian codes. It wasn't until 2010 that the US began putting air barriers in code regulations. And we saw that with ASHRAE 90.1, IECC, IBC, and a few others. Now, I'm sure we have a few architects on the call today that maybe you received your license prior to, let's say, 2005. Well, if that's the case, it's a good chance you were never educated on this product. It didn't exist then. So in school, maybe they introduced the idea of vapor barriers or vapor retarders, but this is not the same air barriers we're seeing in today's applications. So first things first, it's important to understand that the air barrier is only one component, and it must work in conjunction with the insulation, the flashing, and other accessories to achieve its goal. And the goal is to control the unintended movement of air into and out of a building closure. So I like to look at air barriers as the glove of your building. We want to reduce airflow, reduce moisture flow, hence why many people refer to them as air and water barriers, and improve insulation performance. Again, this is a system and we need to look at it that way. Now, when it comes to air, we see it infiltrating our walls in two ways, air leakage and air permeance. Air permeance is the air that passes through material, described here as diffuse flow, and this is inevitable. This is gonna happen no matter what. So our real problem and our real focus is gonna be the air leakage. And this is the air that passes through gaps, holes, leaks in our building envelope. We're describing it here as channel flow. So here are the 4 characteristics of air barriers. Or according to the Air Barrier Association of America, we should also include a 5th characteristic, which is compatibility. Again, works as a system. But the key point here is continuous. So I mentioned our building moves over time. It expands, it contracts. So it's imperative that flexibility be built into the wall system to accommodate for these movements. And this is especially important when you consider the full envelope of the building. So we need to look at our air barrier, or rather our building, when it comes to installing an air barrier, as a 6-sided box. So I know we focused on the cavity wall today, but the air barrier also includes below grade walls as well as the roof. So big key point of this is the transition membranes from your roof to your cavity wall. A great way to look at this, grab a pencil, go to your blueprints, and trace the outline of your air barrier around your wall. If your pencil ever leaves the page, well, your air barrier is not continuous. So we need to make sure we're accounting for all situations there. All right, so according to ABBA, or the Air Barrier Association of America, the following materials are approved as air barriers in our most recent codes. The two most common ones here are sheet applied and fluid applied. I mentioned spray foam earlier. One of the advantages being that it acts as the insulation and the air barrier. Board stock, that's going to be our wood and drywall. Those are kind of like your baseline materials. So if you look at those as a baseline material, everything else is an improvement of those, if you will. We have commercial wrap. That's going to be your Typars, Tyvek home wraps, Benjamin Obdyke. Although this does say commercial, we typically see these more on residential applications. And then the last one here is factory applied membranes. The most common one in the market is probably Huber Wood Zip System. What happens is the air barrier is pre-installed onto our sheathing. And this is a great method for consistency matters. But like the polyiso option, it must be detailed correctly. And again, detailing usually causes the most pains for our contractors. That said, I do want a key point on the two main ones, the sheet applied and fluid applied. Both are available in permeable and non-permeable. Most of the time, the safe bet is to go with a permeable product, but there are some applications where you would want to go with a non-permeable. I would always offer you to, go talk to your manufacturer, ask them what they think, and decide from there. Now, the advantages of a sheet applied air barrier really comes down to the uniform thickness. So it's installed very similarly to peel and stick flashing. So we're seeing masons actually take on this component. It allows them to control the wall better, because a lot of times they sub this out and then they have to wait for the air barrier contractor to finish up before they can come in and handle the brick. So they're taking it on with sheet applied, but again, you would only use sheet applied with stud backup. The advantages of fluid applied would be it's easier to install in most cases, depending on your contractor, but the big one here is CMU. You can see that here. So why do we recommend fluid applied on CMU applications? Well, this goes back to our first component. You can see it sticking out of the wall here, our joint reinforcement. If you think about using a sheet applied in this application, you'd have to detail around all these eyes sticking out of the wall. That would be a nightmare for contractors. So that about wraps it up. Just a quick overview. I know we covered a lot of material today. All of this material is going to be available, and you're always welcome to reach out to our business development team. But quick overview, when it comes to joint reinforcement, remember that less is more. We like to see that 9-gauge ladder reinforcement. When it comes to brick ties, you must consider the insulation being used. With flashing, you want to treat it as a system and consider installability as well as compatibility issues. With insulation, it's simply understanding what options are available for you and deciding what works best for you. And when we talk about air barriers, the big takeaway, it must be continuous. It must tie into adjacent building components via proper detailing. The big thing here, I would say also is, there's more to come in that regards. That about wraps it up. I did mention in the beginning, I wanted to share with you guys a new tool that we're offering. And I'm gonna jump over to the website here. Again, this is gonna bring together everything we learned together in a simple format. So you're looking at my screen now. We're gonna head over to rcat.com. So if you missed a few things, this is gonna be a quick fix. We're gonna search Glen-Gery. And here you can look at all of our extruded brick, handmade brick, take all this information from here. But again, for our purposes today, we're gonna scroll down to masonry accessories. We're gonna click technical details. And here you go, you have a spec ready for you to copy and paste. You can edit it how you want. But if you found something from today's seminar that you might wanna take back to your team, here you go is the reinforcement. We got our brick ties here. Remember, we offer the outboard and inboard option. Again, you can play around this, but this is available for you on our website or at rcat.com. It's free of charge and something you should absolutely take advantage of. I'm going to jump back to our presentation. So at this point, we can open it up to questions. Brian, are you there?
I am here, and we do have a couple questions coming in if you want to take a look.
All right. So we have a question from Catherine. Do you have flashing material recommendations when using ferrule brackets, shelf angle brackets? Again, you definitely want to consult with an engineer in this aspect. I don't want to give you an answer because every shelf angle could be a little bit different. But I would argue that the flexibility of the flexible stainless steel would probably give you the best opportunity to succeed. That being said, we do have a team at Glen-Gery that is designed specifically for questions like this. So you can shoot these answers over us, show us the drawings, and we can take a look and offer best practices. Okay, we got a question from Jack. Some flashing recommendations call for the flashing to be terminated 6 inches above the cavity fill material. Why is this recommended? Is this required if there is insulation between the flashing and cavity fill material? So the big thing here, that's just what code calls for. When we think about our cavity drainage, it's 10 inches. So we want to go 6 inches above that just to make sure that the flashing is catching the water, and the flashing is going to be installed behind the cavity drainage. So the water is effectively finding its way to the base. As far as if you did go 4 inches, I don't personally think it would be the worst thing in the world. But again, this is just something that over time, you know, best practices promoted the idea of 6 inches. It's what manufacturers recommend. So that's what we would recommend as well. We got a question from Christian. Where does HB Flex Flash and PVC key based flashing fit in the good, better, best ranking? Great question, Christian. Flex Flash and PVC key, another option would be high load. These are great flashing options. I would put them hand in hand up at the top. From a flexibility standpoint, they offer that installability factor that we see with the flexible stainless steel. Great. I don't want to say it's a lifetime warranty product because it's not a noble metal, but it does offer great warranty. The big thing here and why we chose to go stainless steel, the cost. The cost of a flexible stainless steel is not going to be much different than a PVC key. So at that point, you're talking about a noble metal. You can make your choice here, but I will say those are great options. You can fit that between best and better. Can we get a copy of the material presented today? Absolutely. Brian will follow up with an email that has the presentation video repeat, but we can also provide you any slides that you want. And again, you do have access to the specifications if you want those. Quick question from an architect. How do we... So if you're not AIA certified, just send an email to Brian. He'll get you worked out there. So April asked the question, what was the max dimension that is currently allowed for the brick to veneer anchor, and what is being increased? You are correct here. So right now it's 4.5 inches. The new code is changing it to 6.5 inches. So again, we're gonna see a wider cavity wall structure. It's something that we do need to prep for. All right, so that about wraps it up. We do have a few more questions, but anything I didn't get to, we can always send an email. We'll get back to your emails and answer any questions you guys might have. But with that, I'm going to pass it back to Brian and allow him to go over a few things.
Thanks so much, Ben. Thank you, everybody, for attending today's official session. That is the conclusion of the AIA accredited presentation. If you would like to stay on, we would like to invite you for a couple more minutes with Ben to learn about Glen-Gery specific products and what we have to offer. Just a reminder, if you did register for today's session with your AIA number, I will be submitting you for credit. If you did not register for today's session and attended, please email me at events@glengery.com. That is events@glengery.com with your AIA information, and I can get that sent in for you. Everybody that attended the full course today will also be getting a certificate of completion within the next 2 business days. And as noted prior, there will be a link to the recording of today's session for you to view again as well. So with that, I'll close out the official presentation. I hope everybody has a great Thursday and stays safe and healthy. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back to you, Ben.
All right. Brian, did you want to touch on this really quick?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Please join us again to next week on Tuesday, June 9th at 1 p.m. We will be inviting Jeff Patterson back to do another presentation on the basics of brickwork detailing. And we have also went ahead and scheduled a few more presentations for July. So when you are RSVPing for next week's presentation, please take a look at what we have to offer through July as well, and share with any colleagues or friends that you believe would be interested in the material. That's all. Thank you.
All right. So just wanted to go over a few things about Glen-Gery. Thank you all for sticking around throughout the presentation. Hope you learned something. I mentioned a quick fact about Brickworks in Glen-Gery in the beginning. Brickworks was formed in 1934, based out of Australia. 2 years ago, they bought out Glen-Gery, moved to North America, and since then we've acquired a few more manufacturers, but again, really changing the perspective of masonry in North America. You can see here we're spread out throughout the country. Our corporate office is located in Wyomissing, Pennsylvania. We have plants throughout the world. I don't know if you guys can see this down here, but I do want to mention our Glen-Gery wall systems based out of South Carolina. A lot of what we discussed today had to do with the Glen-Gery wall systems. So let's go over the fun part. If you think back to that initial chart I had, I'm going to show you guys some awesome new products that we're really excited about. First one here, San Selmo. This is a long format clay brick. They're about 20 inches long. Very unique texture and feel to these bricks. Last week, we actually held a webinar focused on unique case studies, and one of them included the use of San Selmo brick. For that specific job, they wanted to mimic an oyster. So what they did, they used a rough finish texture on the exterior wall, and that represented the shell of the oyster. And then for the interior walls, they used a smooth, curly white brick, which portrayed the inside of an oyster. So if you're interested in that, I highly recommend going back and watching that webinar. Some really cool stuff. Venetian glass. So I mentioned in the beginning, when Brickworks came over to North America, they brought over new forms of masonry that we didn't even think existed. This is what I had in mind. So obviously a very sleek look. They're available in 5 different colors, and we're seeing them used a lot on storefronts, accent walls, things like that. So if you really want to make an impression for your customer, consider using these. They do cost kind of heavily, so if you're looking for creative ways to implement something like this, again, you can reach out to our team and we'll work with you to make sure it fits your budget. Clay coat's another popular brand of ours. We do offer glazed and clay coat being the breathable option. And these bricks have been especially popular in the gray scale, which really promotes that modern contemporary look and feel. Our handmade brick, yes, handmade brick is still being made by hand, just like the early days of masonry. We have people actually taking raw material and placing them into molds. I mentioned the advertisements in the beginning. If you didn't get a chance to see them, look up our advertisement on handmade brick. It's going to give you a unique perspective, and when you see it on a wall like this, it makes you really appreciate it more, knowing what went into it. Roman Maximus, this is another narrow brick that has become really popular. The way I would describe this brick, I know it's kind of counterintuitive, but it's kind of a modern brick with an ancient feel to it. I really like the narrow, long look of it. You can see some of the ways they stack it. This is an interior wall, and they stacked it purposely like that to give it a different type of look and feel to it. So awesome product here. We also offer stone products. So Creative Minds is based out of California, and our landmark product, which is made in-house at Glen-Gery, we make that in Kentucky. We offer pavers as well, and when it comes to our pavers, they go through numerous tests, including freeze-thaw. Also, we test that they will ensure color hold, so this gives us a little edge when you're talking about cementitious pavers. We think clay is the way to go. Feldhaus, this product comes from Germany. This product meets the highest standards of PCI requirements, which is the Precast Institute. So it really demonstrates the superior manufacturing qualities of Germany and what they can do over there. So these thin bricks are also economically friendly. They're available in an array of colors, and we see them being used a lot on parking decks, but a lot of options to use with this brick. Going along with thin brick in our wall systems, we offer true bricks as well as thin tech. These are new forms of applications of masonry, kind of a response to the labor market. Like I mentioned earlier, we're not seeing a lot of young people going into bricklaying. So this opens up the door to use contractors like carpenters or anyone else. It's a very easy install, but it still gives you that authentic brick look that we like to see. So here's a couple of trending products, a mix of the gray tone as well as our old traditional looks. Same thing here with the thin brick products. Again, go to our website and take a look at all these. A lot of great options. From an advertisement standpoint, I would argue that we're really setting the bar in the industry. I mentioned earlier the positioning of brick is really evolving from that traditional commodity product to a more luxurious, modern, contemporary look. I'd like to think that we have a big part of that, and we're pushing the envelope there. So take a look. Again, if you didn't see the commercials, go to YouTube or go to our website and take a look. But that about wraps it up. Again, I want to thank you all for sticking with me, the ones that especially stayed in this last portion. It's much appreciated. I hope you learned something that you can take back to your team and improve your specifications. Again, we appreciate all your efforts to continue innovating in the masonry industry, and we hope you consider Glen-Gery for your next project. Thank you all, and hope you stay safe out there.